You are looking at the greatest threat to American national security today, and I am not talking about the silos in China or the revisionist ambitions of Vladimir Putin. I am talking about the crumbling foundation of our own house. We spend billions on defense, we project power across the oceans, and we talk endlessly about deterrence, but deterrence means nothing if the decision making apparatus in Washington is corroded by the whims of one man who views the Constitution not as a sacred covenant, but as a rough draft he can edit with a Sharpie. I have spent my entire career in the arena of hard power. I have negotiated treaties. I have withdrawn from them when they did not serve our interests. And I have sat in the Situation Room when the lives of thousands depended on clear, cold, rational thinking. I know what strength looks like, and I know what weakness looks like. What we are seeing now, this flirtation with indefinite power, this talk of a third term, is not strength. It is the most dangerous kind of weakness because it invites chaos into the very heart of the American system. When I served as National Security Advisor, I saw firsthand how Donald Trump operates. I saw the lack of discipline. I saw the inability to separate personal interest from national interest. But what we are facing now is different. It is no longer just the chaotic impulses of an amateur. It is a systematized strategy to dismantle the checks and balances that have kept this republic alive for nearly 250 years. You have heard the comments. You have heard him joke at rallies about serving 12 more years. The media, in their usual feckless manner, laughs it off. They call it trolling. They say he is just trying to trigger his opponents. But I was in the room. I know how this man thinks. Donald Trump does not joke about power. He tests the waters. He throws out an outrageous idea to see who bows and who stands tall. And when he sees the Republican Party bow, when he sees the applause, he takes a step forward. This is not a joke. It is a probing attack on the 22nd Amendment. The Constitution is clear: 2 terms, that is the limit. It was the precedent set by Washington, who could have been king but chose to be a citizen. It was codified after FDR. It is the firewall against tyranny. But for a man who has already suggested that the Constitution should be terminated to overturn an election he lost, a piece of paper is not a barrier. It is merely an obstacle to be removed by force of will or by the mob. And do not think for a second that this is just rhetoric. If you look closely at the architecture being built around him right now by the sycophants and the yes men who are preparing for a second term, you will see the blueprints for a soft coup. They call it Project 2025. It sounds like a think tank paper, dry and bureaucratic, but read the fine print. It is a declaration of war on the professional civil service. It is a plan to reclassify tens of thousands of career officials, the experts on nuclear energy, on epidemiology, on ballistic missile defense, and strip them of their protections. This is often referred to as Schedule F. Why does Schedule F matter to you? Why should you care if some bureaucrat in Washington loses their job? You should care because these are the people who know how the government works. These are the guardrails. When you fire the experts and replace them with political loyalists whose only qualification is absolute fealty to the president, you do not have a government anymore. You have a royal court. You have a system where the truth is afraid to speak to power. I have seen this dynamic before. I have seen it in third world dictatorships where the leader is surrounded by generals who are too afraid to tell him the tank treads are rusted and the fuel is stolen. That is how armies collapse. That is how nations fall. And that is exactly the structure being prepared for the United States government. It is the unitary executive theory taken to a grotesque extreme where the Department of Justice becomes a personal law firm for the president, and the military is viewed not as the defender of the Constitution, but as a Praetorian guard for the man in the Oval Office. The danger here is not just about Donald Trump. Men like him come and go in history. The danger is the precedent. If we allow the norm of the peaceful transfer of power to be shattered, if we allow the term limit to be treated as a suggestion, we are signaling to the world that the American experiment has failed. How can we look Xi Jinping in the eye and lecture him on the rule of law when we are dismantling it at home? How can we rally allies against authoritarianism in Europe when we are courting it in Washington? Credibility is the currency of power, and right now we are debasing our currency. I have always believed in a strong executive. I have argued for robust presidential powers in foreign policy. But strength must be tethered to law, or it is just thuggery. We are walking a very thin line. The guardrails are creaking, the warning lights are blinking red, and the question we have to answer is whether we are going to be a nation of laws or a nation of one man. This is the reality we must confront, and we must do it with eyes wide open because the adversaries of the United States are watching and they are waiting for us to tear ourselves apart. When I speak of adversaries watching, I am not speaking hypothetically. I have sat across the table from Vladimir Putin. I have looked into the eyes of Xi Jinping. These men are cold, calculating realists. They do not believe in the sentimentalities of democracy, but they understand power. And the one thing they fear is a united, resolved America that acts with continuity and strategic purpose. What they see now, however, is an America that is preparing to consume itself. The Kremlin does not need to destabilize the United States through disinformation campaigns or cyber attacks when the president himself is willing to shatter the institutions of national security for personal retribution. When the commander in chief treats the Department of Justice and the intelligence community as enemies of the state, he is doing the work of our rivals for them. He is hollowing out the very mechanisms that allow us to project force and maintain order in an anarchic world. You hear this phrase constantly from the MAGA wing, the deep state. It is their favorite boogeyman. They use it to describe everything from a bureaucrat processing a visa application to the FBI investigating foreign influence. But let us be very precise about what they are actually attacking. They are attacking the concept of neutral competence. When I was at the White House, I didn't always agree with the career staff. We had fierce debates. I often overruled them because I was the national security advisor and that was my job. But I never doubted their loyalty to the Constitution. I never viewed them as a cabal of saboteurs. To Donald Trump, however, anyone who says no, anyone who says, Mr. President, the law does not allow that, or Mr. President, the intelligence contradicts your gut feeling, is branded a traitor. This is the mindset of a mob boss, not a statesman. And the strategy of purging these voices is not about draining the swamp, it is about filling the swamp with alligators who will only snap at the president's enemies. Consider the implications for our intelligence capabilities. Intelligence is about hard, often unpleasant facts. It requires objective analysts who are protected from political pressure so they can tell the president the truth, even when the truth is ugly. If you implement Schedule F, if you strip these analysts of their civil service protections, you create a system of perverse incentives. You create a culture where the analyst tells the president what he wants to hear, not what he needs to know, because the analyst wants to keep his job. We have seen this before in history. We saw it in Saddam Hussein's Iraq, where generals lied about their readiness because they feared being executed. We are not there yet, but that is the trajectory. If the president surrounds himself with yes men who validate his delusions about global affairs, American foreign policy becomes untethered from reality. We will walk into conflicts we do not understand, and we will withdraw from alliances that keep us safe, all because the echo chamber in the Oval Office has been sealed shut against the truth. This is why the assault on the Justice Department is particularly pernicious. The rule of law is the bedrock of our economic and military strength. It is what separates us from the banana republics. But Trump has made it clear that he views the Attorney General not as the chief law enforcement officer of the land, but as his personal defense attorney and his political sword. He wants to weaponize the investigative powers of the state to pursue his opponents. We are talking about the criminalization of politics. Once you cross that Rubicon, there is no going back. If the next administration uses the FBI to arrest the opposition, we are no longer a republic. We are just another failing state with a flag. And do not think our allies are not taking notes. I have spoken to diplomats and leaders from Tokyo to London. They are terrified. They are asking if America is still a reliable partner or if we are descending into a cycle of revenge and instability. If they cannot trust our word, if they cannot trust our stability, they will hedge their bets. They will cut deals with Beijing. They will accommodate Tehran. The structure of the Western alliance, which has prevented a third world war for 80 years, rests on the credibility of the United States. And credibility is exactly what Donald Trump is selling off to satisfy his ego. We must also confront the reality of what this internal weakness invites abroad. Weakness is provocative. When the wolves see that the shepherd is fighting with his sheepdogs, they attack. We are seeing Iran pushing the envelope with its nuclear program. We are seeing China ramping up pressure on Taiwan. They are calculating that a Washington consumed by a constitutional crisis, a Washington where the agencies are being purged and the military is being politicized, will be paralyzed. They are betting that we will be too distracted by our own civil war, a bureaucratic civil war, a political civil war, to respond to their aggression. And they might be right. If the National Security Council is staffed by internet trolls and loyalist hacks instead of seasoned professionals, how will we manage a crisis in the Taiwan Strait? How will we handle a nuclear escalation on the Korean Peninsula? Competence matters, experience matters. And when you purge the government of its institutional memory in the name of loyalty, you are essentially blinding yourself in a knife fight. This is not about draining the swamp, it is about burning down the village to roast a pig. And nowhere is that risk more acute, more immediate than in the politicization of the American military. We possess the most lethal fighting force in human history, designed to project power to the furthest corners of the earth, to deter great power aggression, and to obliterate those who would do us harm. But a military is only as strong as its chain of command, and that chain of command relies on a sacred trust between the civilian leadership and the uniformed services. That trust is being eroded by a man who does not understand the difference between a general and a henchman. I recall the disdain he often showed for the constraints of the uniform code of military justice, or the traditions of nonpartisanship that keep our armed forces out of domestic politics. He often referred to my generals as if they were corporate regional managers he could hire and fire at will. He could never grasp that their oath was to the Constitution, not to him personally. Now we hear open talk from his circle about invoking the Insurrection Act on day one. Think about what that means. We are talking about deploying the 82nd Airborne or the 101st Airborne not to the Fulda Gap or the Taiwan Strait, but to the streets of American cities. We are talking about turning the weapons of war against American citizens to suppress dissent. This is not law and order. This is a hallmark of failing regimes. When a leader cannot govern through civil institutions and has to resort to the military to maintain control, he has lost the mandate to lead. But beyond the domestic horror of such a scenario, consider the catastrophic impact on our national security. If our soldiers are patrolling American streets, they are not training for high intensity conflict. If our officers are debating the legality of orders to detain civilians, they are not planning how to defeat the People's Liberation Army. You cannot have a military that is both a domestic police force and a global superpower. You have to choose, and Donald Trump seems poised to choose the former, sacrificing our global standing for his own sense of control. This places our military leadership in an impossible position. We are moving toward a constitutional crisis where a four-star general may have to decide between a direct order from the commander in chief and his oath to the Constitution. That is a scenario that breaks armies. It shatters the cohesion of the force. And while we are paralyzed by this internal conflict, what do you think our adversaries are doing? Do you think the planners in Beijing are pausing their naval buildup? Do you think the mullahs in Iran are stopping their enrichment of uranium out of respect for our domestic turmoil? No, they are accelerating. They see an America that is turning its guns inward. They see a superpower that is distracted, divided, and confused. They see an opportunity. This obsession with internal enemies is the classic diversion of the demagogue, but in the 21st century, it is a strategic suicide pact. We face a complex landscape of threats that requires absolute clarity and focus. We have a revisionist Russia probing NATO's borders. We have an expansionist China seeking to rewrite the rules of the international order. We have rogue states like North Korea and Iran enhancing their ballistic missile capabilities. Dealing with these threats requires a president who wakes up every morning thinking about how to advance American interests abroad, not how to settle scores at home. It requires a national security apparatus that is agile, empowered, and led by competent professionals, not a hollowed out shell staffed by loyalists who are afraid to speak up. Furthermore, the strength of the United States has never just been about the number of ships we have or the yield of our warheads. It is about our alliances. I have been a critic of international institutions when they infringe on our sovereignty, but I have always been a staunch defender of bilateral and multilateral alliances that serve U.S. interests. NATO, our treaties in the Indo Pacific, these are force multipliers. They allow us to project power and share the burden of global security. But alliances are built on trust. They are built on the assurance that the United States is a rational actor that abides by the rule of law. If we become a nation where the president ignores the courts, purges the civil service, and uses the military for political ends, we become unpredictable. And in international relations, unpredictability is not a virtue, it is a liability. Our allies will not follow a leader they cannot trust. They will not share intelligence with a government that leaks it for political gain. They will not host our bases if they fear those bases will be used to support a rogue regime in Washington. We are risking the dismantling of the entire post war security architecture not because of external pressure, but because of internal rot. We are doing to ourselves what the Soviet Union could never do to us. We are delegitimizing the American idea. Let us dispel another myth that seems to have taken hold in the minds of the isolationist right. There is this belief that Donald Trump, by sheer force of personality, can charm the dictators of the world into submission. They believe that if he just gets in a room with Putin or Kim Jong un, he can cut a deal that saves the world. I have been in those rooms. I have watched these interactions. And I can tell you that this is a dangerous delusion. Foreign policy is not real estate. You cannot just schmooze your way out of a nuclear standoff. When Trump sits down with a dictator, he sees a peer, a strong man he admires. The dictator sees a mark. They see a narcissist who can be manipulated with flattery and red carpet parades. We saw this in Singapore. We saw this in Helsinki. He gave away leverage for nothing but a photo op and a beautiful letter. This is where the destruction of the professional class becomes a matter of life and death. Diplomacy is not just about the summit, it is about the grind. It is about the thousands of hours of work done by experts at the State Department, the Treasury, and the Pentagon to build leverage before the president ever walks into the room. It is about constructing a sanctions regime so tight that the adversary has no choice but to negotiate. It is about moving carrier strike groups to the right coordinates to show we mean business. But if you have gutted the State Department because you think it is full of globalists, and if you have hollowed out the Treasury's sanctions teams because you replace them with political hacks, you have no leverage. You are walking into the negotiation naked. You might feel strong, but you have no stick to back up your words. And men like Xi Jinping know exactly how to count the cards. The consequences of this hollowed out America will be felt most acutely in the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. For decades, the United States has held a nuclear umbrella over our allies, nations like Japan, South Korea, and our partners in the Middle East. They have refrained from building their own nuclear arsenals because they trusted that Washington would trade New York for Seoul or Tokyo if it came to that. That trust is the cornerstone of nonproliferation. But if that trust evaporates, if they look at Washington and see a government at war with itself, a president who questions the value of alliances, and threatens to withdraw troops on a whim, they will do what any rational nation would do. They will look to their own defense. We are staring down the barrel of a world where Tokyo, Seoul, Riyadh, and perhaps others feel compelled to develop their own nuclear deterrence because they can no longer rely on the United States. Imagine a nuclear armed East Asia. Imagine a nuclear armed Middle East where it's not just Israel, but Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Iran, all with their fingers on the trigger. That is a recipe for Armageddon. And it will happen not because of what our enemies do, but because of what we failed to do. It will happen because we abdicated our role as the guarantor of global order in favor of a petty, vindictive isolationism masquerading as America first. While we are busy dismantling our own government, our adversaries are coalescing. We are seeing the formation of a new axis. It is not an ideological alliance like the Comintern. It is a transactional alliance of grievances. You have Russia providing energy and combat experience. You have Iran providing drones and proxy forces. You have North Korea providing artillery shells. And you have China providing the economic lifeline and the diplomatic cover. They are coordinating. They are helping each other evade the very sanctions that we are struggling to enforce. They see the window of opportunity opening. They see an America that is tired, an America that is bickering over conspiracy theories while the map of the world is being redrawn. This is the hard truth that the populists ignore. Isolationism is not a strategy, it is a surrender. You cannot build a wall high enough to keep out the consequences of global chaos. If Europe falls to Russian coercion because we abandoned NATO, our markets will crash. If the Pacific becomes a Chinese lake because we withdrew our fleets, our supply chains will be strangled. The oceans do not protect us anymore. In the era of cyber warfare, hypersonic missiles, and globalized terror, the front line is everywhere. And to defend that front line, we need a government that is serious, capable, and united. We need a president who understands that the Constitution is the source of our strength, not an impediment to his power. We are drifting toward a precipice, and the people driving the bus are blindfolded by their own vanity. But the cost of this vanity is not paid by the politicians in Washington. It is paid by you. It is paid by the young men and women we send into harm's way without a coherent strategy. It is paid by the families who rely on a stable economy that is now being gambled away on protectionist whims. There is a terrible misconception among the populists that dismantling the administrative state means getting rid of red tape. It does not. It means getting rid of the radar systems that warn us of incoming storms. When a crisis hits, and a crisis always hits, whether it is a new pandemic, a massive cyber attack on our power grid, or a terrorist plot, you do not want a government staffed by podcasters and campaign donors. You want the gray men and women who have spent 30 years studying epidemiology or critical infrastructure defense. You want the experts. We saw a glimpse of what happens when competence is scorned during the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. That was a disaster born of a refusal to listen to military advice, a desire for a political win over strategic necessity, and a complete disregard for the operational realities on the ground. We abandoned our allies. We left American citizens behind. We signaled to every terrorist in the world that the United States does not have the stomach for the long fight. And why did it happen? Because the decision-making process was broken, because the warnings of the intelligence community were ignored in favor of a predetermined political narrative. Now imagine that level of dysfunction applied to a conflict with China. Imagine that level of incompetence applied to a nuclear standoff. The margin for error in the Taiwan Strait is zero. If we get it wrong there, we do not just lose prestige. We lose a war that could end civilization as we know it. This is the human cost of the loyalty above all doctrine. It creates a government that is incapable of protecting its citizens because it is too busy protecting the leader's ego. It is the same pathology I have seen in failing states around the world. I have watched regimes where the leader is surrounded by luxury and sycophants while the infrastructure crumbles and the people suffer. We like to think it can't happen here. We think American exceptionalism is a magic shield that protects us from the consequences of bad governance. It is not. Exceptionalism is something you have to earn every single day. And right now, we are squandering it. We are also witnessing a moral collapse in our foreign policy that mirrors this domestic decay. There is a direct line between the way Trump treats the Constitution and the way he treats our partners abroad. It is purely transactional. There is no honor, no shared values, no long-term commitment. It is, what have you done for me lately? This approach transforms the United States from the leader of the free world into a mercenary state. We saw it when he abandoned the Kurds in Syria to be slaughtered by Turkey, allies who had bled alongside us to destroy the ISIS caliphate. I argued against that decision with everything I had. It was a stain on our national honor. But to Trump, they were just expendable assets on a balance sheet. When you treat allies like contractors, you end up alone. And in a world of wolves, the lone sheep is the first to be eaten. This fits a larger, darker pattern sweeping the globe. We are seeing a contagion of authoritarianism from Budapest to Brasilia, from Moscow to Mar-a-Lago. There is a movement that rejects the complexities of democratic governance in favor of the simplistic rule of the strongman. They promise that if you just give them total power, they will restore lost glory. They will fight the enemies within. They will make the nation great again. But look at the track record. Putin promised to restore Russian greatness. Instead, He has destroyed his country's economy and sent a generation of young Russian men to die in a meat grinder in Ukraine. He fell into the dictator's trap, believing his own propaganda, surrounded by yes men who were too terrified to tell him that his army was corrupt and his strategy was flawed. Donald Trump is building that same trap for himself in Washington. He wants to remove the naysayers. He wants to silence the critics. He wants to hear only what pleases him. And if he succeeds, he will lead America into the same kind of strategic catastrophe that has befallen every other nation that chose the cult of personality over the rule of law. We are not immune to history. If we adopt the habits of tyrants, we will suffer the fate of tyrannies.